Hi, my name is Adam, and today we're going to be talking about stocks, bonds, and dividends. Oh my. What we're going to talk about today is really corporate finance in the capacity of stocks and bonds and dividends, and how that affects a company. When a company decides to go public in their IPO, it's really a game-changing moment for that company. When you're maybe a smaller company or when you're a private company, there's a lot of decisions that can be made in-house that really don't affect other people. But as we go and go to a public company, and you have all these other people that have a say or in charge of your company, or at least have a vote, it really changes. We need to understand the concepts revolving around that, as far as what ownership means, what we owe to our stockholders, and what they owe to us to a capacity. So this is going to go and cover that, and we'll see what's going on. All right, like I said in the first slide, really going public when a company puts its IPO out, it's really a pivotal moment for that company. You have a lot of, quite possibly millions of people or thousands or whatever the case may be. You have a lot of people that have now a small chunk of ownership within your company. And with that, we're going to go into some terms here on the next slide that are kind of help describe some of the functions within that. But not all of the stock that you sell and the dividends you give out, not everything is going to go just out to your shareholders, your stockholders. Some of that money, some of those can be put back into the company or held onto the company for various reasons. We're going to include that here within the next couple of slides, and I'll give you kind of a talk on of what that means. But really, the meat and potatoes of this, the first two slides that I want to really convey to you is that that's a real pivotal moment for a company when it's uh, not just a small number of people having a say in what happens with the company. It goes to hundreds, thousands, potentially millions, depending on how many shares you have that are out in the open. So let me go to some definitions next and give us a better idea of what we're talking about. All right, we're going to hit some definitions, and I'll try to take a pause if there's something of note or something that might be interesting to you. But I'm just going to read some definitions and kind of talk on a little bit as well. So first of all, we're going to talk about authorized stocks. As you can see, authorized stock or unauthorized shares refers to a maximum number of shares that a corporation is legally permitted to issue as specified in its articles of incorporations in the U.S. or in a company's charter in other parts of the world. So again, when a company puts out its IPO, and talks with the underwriters, there's a certain amount of shares that they said that they're going to provide or that they're going to sell. So an authorized stock, that's exactly what that is, pretty cut and dry. Also within this, I added some different references just because the book does fine, but I think I'm not the brightest guy in the box at all times, so maybe some more layman's words are easier for me, and hopefully that'll help you a little bit too. Next up is common stock, and that represents the basic ownership of a corporation. Just when you decide to go on whatever app you want to use, maybe like Robinhood, or maybe you want to work with a stockbroker or whoever you may be working with. It's just buying regular common stock. It's pretty cut and dry, right? Next up is preferred stock. Now, preferred stock is an interesting animal. And I'll read you the definition. I'll go into why. Preferred shareholders have priority over common stockholders when it comes to dividends, which generally yield more than common stock. It can be paid monthly or quarterly. Now that sounds like a great deal, and you say, well, how can I get in the preferred stock VIP club? And that's very cool. The downside is, depending on what organization it is, what company it is, or corporation, I should say, um, preferred stock lacks a few things. Primarily, and the most important, I think, is voting rights. Most preferred stock shareholders do not have voting rights. Now, depending on how active you want to be in that company, that can kind of play a role within that. Um, but there's that. That being said, for common stock, when the company or the corporation, excuse me, is giving out dividends, if the company did not make numbers, didn't make the numbers that they wanted to, they don't have to pay dividends out to common stock shareholders. They have no need to. For preferred stock, however, they get the first priority within that. So even say the company made less and they still decide to give out dividends, preferred stockholders are the first to get those monies. So they're really good for long term. If you're looking for more stability, preferred stocks are definitely the way to go. But yeah, again, you don't have voting rights. If that's important to you, it's probably not the one. And finally, for this page, stockholders' equity. Stockholders' equity, also known as shareholders' equity, is reported on a corporation's balance sheet and is the amount, and its amount is the difference between the amount of a corporation's assets and liabilities. That's essentially, ALE, right? So um, when it comes down to it, stockholders' equity is just the difference between what the company has as assets and its liabilities. It's that in between meat. All right, next up we have issued stock. All right, now issued stock, the definition says stock that has been issued but may or may not be held by stockholders. And again, that's from the book. Interesting about issued stock is that's the amount that's out there that's able to be sold, but it may not be in the hands of the stockholders and shareholders. What a company might do, or a corporation, what they might do is they might have stock out in the open that is being sold, and they might retain some of those stocks. They might use that as an incentive for their employees, or they may use that as leverage later on. So that way, if they want to go and do a second issuance of stocks, they can go and use it in that capacity. But issued stock doesn't necessarily mean that it's out in the open, ready for sale. Next out is retained earnings, and retained earnings is the amount of net income left over the business after it's paid out dividends to its shareholders. Interesting about retained earnings, I think at least, is that money, that extra money, is the cream of the crop, right? The company's already gone and fed out its dividends to both preferred and common stocks. And what this money can be used for, which I think is interesting, is going back into itself. So it can be used to maybe shell out more dividends or a higher dividend. But what I think is what neat about it is that retained earnings can be fed back into itself. So it can be used for business progression, business growth, maybe not have to do a second issuance of stocks, and basically just for the financial, for the fundraising piece of it, those earnings can go back into the company. And some stockholders prefer that the company would hold on to those retained earnings so they can feed the company for better returns in their dividends later on down the road. So that's pretty neat, I think. Dividends, that probably should have been at the very beginning. And the dividend is just a distribution of the corporation's earnings to stockholders. So a company, again, can decide to go and hold on to dividends, not issue dividends, or go and basically give their shareholders a little piece of the pie outside of the price of their stock if they would decide to trade that. And the stock certificate is paper evidence of ownership of a corporation, which I think is pretty easy. All right, application. As an entry-level employee, I think it's very crucial for a person to have a basic understanding of the principles that we just covered, from stocks to dividends to equity, retained earnings, etc. At least just have a basic understanding of it. If you don't know that, you're probably on the power curve. Mid-level and executive level, these are the folks that are going to be using these tools and for the application of new projects and different customers that they're going to use. This is where they get the meat and potatoes of how they're going to shape the business for the future. Kind of going back to the entry level, and this is kind of a self-admittance, just within the last year or so, I've been getting into stocks and trying to understand what that means. And a lot of people that I talk to about that, at least in my group, don't know a whole lot about this. And this is really applicable stuff. My line of work, maybe not necessarily, but for somebody who wants to invest their money for returns later down the road, should probably have a basic understanding of this. And I'm surprised at the amount of my peers don't have knowledge of it. So entry level professional also, really as an adult, I think it'd be beneficial to know these principles and these ways of managing corporate finance to really help out financially for a person. And thinking of a viable solution for the question of ethical application, how does this affect us ethically? The first thing I could think of realistically is retained earnings. Now, like I said earlier in this presentation, retained earnings can be fed back into the company for investment, for future projects, or for financial gain, etc. What I could see being a potential thing is maybe with those retained earnings that you could feed that back into the company and use that for executives for kind of giving them extra bonuses or paying for travel or benefits or perks that maybe aren't included with the job. Realistically, I think has been the theme for the entire course is really using ethical principles and using God's judgment along with your innate judgment on how to go and financially deal with your shareholders' investments. As soon as you go public in this perspective, you owe something to the shareholder, to the stockholder, as an employee, to go and make the best decision possible with their funds. I use Colossians 3:23 as an example. Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord and not for human masters. We really need to be doing the best we can through God's in our own eyes. All right, thank you again for joining me today. I hope this kind of gave you a good perspective of some of the basics of corporate finance and the capacity of stocks and bonds and equity and dividends and all those neat words. Appreciate you joining me. Here are some of the references that I use. Feel free to look them up. Again, thanks for joining me. Take care.